Let's begin by understanding what distinguishes a super empath from someone who is simply empathic. The difference isn't just degree. It's a fundamental quality of consciousness. The super empath possesses all the sensitivity and attunement of a typical empath, but they've developed something crucial that changes everything. They've learned to trust their perceptions completely. Trust, combined with their extraordinary observational capacity, makes them perhaps the most dangerous person a narcissist could ever choose to betray. Throughout the relationship, while the narcissist believes they're successfully manipulating and controlling, the super empath has been doing something the narcissist doesn't recognize. They've been watching, learning, cataloging. Every inconsistency between word and action gets noted. Every manipulation tactic gets filed away. Every moment where the mask slipped, every time the public persona diverged from the private reality, every subtle cruelty disguised as concern, all of it gets recorded with remarkable precision. This isn't paranoia or hypervigilance in the pathological sense. It's pattern recognition operating at an extraordinarily high level. The super empath's mind works like a sophisticated data analysis system, constantly processing microexpressions, tonal shifts, behavioral patterns, comparing current behavior against historical data, making predictions about what will happen next. And critically, unlike the typical empath, who might doubt these perceptions, who might gaslight themselves into thinking they're being too sensitive or reading too much into things, the super empath has learned to trust what they observe. This trust in their own perception is what makes them fundamentally different. They've likely been through enough relationships, enough life experience, to know that their gut instincts are reliable. When something feels off, they don't dismiss it. They file it away as data. When someone's words don't match their energy, they trust the energy. When a pattern emerges, they recognize it for what it is, rather than making endless excuses for it. So by the time the betrayal happens, the affair, the lie that can't be explained away, the cruelty that finally becomes undeniable, the super empath isn't shocked into psychological collapse. They're not questioning their sanity or wondering if they misunderstood. Instead, the betrayal acts as a confirmation, the final piece of evidence that makes sense of everything they've been observing. Every manipulation attempt was a lesson in manipulation tactics. Every gaslighting episode was a masterclass in how gaslighting works. Every calculated cruelty was a demonstration of the narcissist's true character. The super empath wasn't just experiencing these things. They were studying them, understanding the psychology behind them, learning the entire playbook. This accumulated knowledge becomes extraordinarily dangerous to the narcissist post-betrayal, because now the super empath isn't operating from confusion or self-doubt. They're operating from clarity, armed with a comprehensive understanding of exactly who they were dealing with, exactly how that person operates, and exactly what tactics they'll try to deploy next. The narcissist has essentially spent years training someone to become immune to their influence. The narcissist's greatest vulnerability isn't being exposed to someone who doesn't know them. It's being fully known by someone who's finally decided to stop pretending they don't see. Now, this accumulated knowledge and clarity becomes particularly dangerous because of something unique about the super empath's psychological structure. They possess traits that, in another context, might be called narcissistic: confidence, assertiveness, strategic thinking, the capacity for calculated action, but without the underlying pathology. And this distinction is absolutely crucial to understanding why betraying the super empath is the narcissist's fatal miscalculation. What I mean is this: the super empath can access what we might call the functional aspects of narcissistic traits without being imprisoned by them. They can be confident without needing constant external validation. They can be assertive without requiring others to submit. They can think strategically without losing their moral compass. They can even be ruthless in self-protection without becoming cruel for cruelty's sake. These capacities exist in their psychological toolkit, but they're tools the super empath chooses to use, not compulsions they're driven by. This gives the super empath something the narcissist fundamentally lacks: flexibility and range. The narcissist is locked into their patterns, compulsively repeating the same strategies regardless of effectiveness, because they can't access other ways of being. But the super empath can shift modes. During the relationship, they likely operated primarily from their empathic side, nurturing, understanding, accommodating, trying to see the best in the narcissist. The narcissist mistook this choice for weakness, for the entirety of who the super empath was. But when betrayal happens, when the super empath finally recognizes that empathy and accommodation are being exploited rather than reciprocated, they can access an entirely different set of capabilities. They can become strategically detached. They can plan methodically. They can act with decisive firmness. They can match the narcissist's tactical maneuvering. But with the crucial advantage of emotional intelligence, the narcissist doesn't possess. Think about what this means practically. The narcissist tries to gaslight, but the super empath has already documented everything and trusts their memory completely. The narcissist tries to smear their reputation, but the super empath responds with calm, factual precision that makes the narcissist look increasingly unhinged. The narcissist tries to hoover them back with false promises, but the super empath can analyze the manipulation attempt with cold clarity and resist it entirely. The narcissist tries to provoke an emotional reaction, but the super empath can regulate their nervous system and respond from a grounded, strategic place. This is what makes the super empath so formidable post-betrayal. They can essentially beat the narcissist at their own game, but they're playing with a full deck of emotional and psychological capacities, while the narcissist is limited to their narrow range of manipulative tactics. The super empath can be warm or cold, vulnerable or boundaried, collaborative or confrontational. Whatever the situation requires, the narcissist keeps deploying the same strategies, increasingly desperate as they realize nothing is working. Particularly threatening to the narcissist is that the super empath doesn't get trapped in the emotional reactivity that typically makes empaths vulnerable. They can feel their anger, their hurt, their sense of betrayal, but they're not controlled by these emotions. They can hold the feelings while simultaneously making clear-headed strategic decisions. They have access to both heart and mind, emotion and logic, vulnerability and strength. The narcissist built their entire approach around a target who would remain soft, accommodating, and emotionally reactive. What they encounter instead is someone who can mirror their tactical sophistication while maintaining an ethical core they can never touch. The most dangerous opponent isn't someone who's only strong or only empathic. It's someone who can be both and who knows exactly when to be which. This strategic flexibility becomes even more devastating to the narcissist when we understand what the super empath was providing before the betrayal occurred. And this is something the narcissist fundamentally fails to recognize until it's gone. The super empath's loyalty wasn't just emotional support. It was the entire infrastructure that allowed the narcissist to function in the world without facing consequences. Let me be specific about what this means. The super empath, with their intelligence, social skills, and emotional attunement, was likely managing vast areas of the narcissist's life that the narcissist took completely for granted. They were the ones smoothing over conflicts the narcissist created. When the narcissist was inappropriate at a social gathering, the super empath was doing damage control, explaining, reframing, making excuses that preserved the narcissist's reputation. When the narcissist's behavior threatened professional relationships, the super empath was often the bridge builder, the one who maintained those connections despite the narcissist's toxicity. The super empath was translating the narcissist to the world and the world to the narcissist. They were providing emotional labor that made the narcissist appear more functional, more reasonable, more stable than they actually were. They were the shock absorber between the narcissist's chaos and the natural consequences that should have followed. In many cases, the super empath's own credibility, their own good reputation, their own social capital was being loaned to the narcissist, functioning as a kind of legitimacy by association. Think about what this looks like practically. The narcissist says something cruel or inappropriate, and the super empath privately addresses it with the wounded party, offering context, apology, reassurance. The narcissist burns a professional bridge, and the super empath maintains a relationship, keeping doors open that the narcissist's behavior should have closed. The narcissist creates financial chaos, and the super empath's competence in planning compensates for it. The narcissist's version of events doesn't match reality, and the super empath's presence lends credibility that makes people question their own perceptions. This protection operates at such a fundamental level that the narcissist doesn't even recognize it as protection. They experience it as simply the natural order of things. Of course people believe them. Of course relationships continue. Of course opportunities remain available. They attribute this to their own charm, their own capabilities, their own magnetic personality. They don't realize that a significant portion of their ability to move through the world without consequences is entirely dependent on the super empath's continuous invisible labor. When betrayal severs the super empath's loyalty, all of this infrastructure vanishes. Suddenly the narcissist is facing the world without their most competent advocate. The damage control stops. The reputation management ends. The bridge building ceases. The credibility buffer disappears. And the narcissist often doesn't connect these dots. They don't realize that the increasing social friction, too, they're experiencing the relationships that suddenly become difficult, the consequences that start accumulating. All of this is the direct result of no longer having the super empath running interference. What makes this particularly dangerous is that the super empath doesn't typically withdraw this support vindictively or dramatically. They simply stop doing work that was never their responsibility in the first place. They stop managing other people's reactions to the narcissist's behavior. They stop explaining away what shouldn't need explaining. They stop protecting someone who betrayed them from the natural consequences of their own actions. The narcissist doesn't lose just a partner when they betray a super empath. They lose the entire invisible support system that made their dysfunction appear functional to the outside world. This withdrawal of protection becomes even more formidable because of how the super empath executes their departure. And this is where we see perhaps the starkest difference between different types of empath responding to betrayal. Typical empath might leave emotionally or impulsively, perhaps still entangled in shared assets, mutual friends, or ongoing communication. But the super empath does something the narcissist is completely unprepared for. They conduct what can only be described as a strategic extraction. There's no dramatic scene, no emotional explosion that the narcissist can then use to paint them as unstable or vindictive. Instead, there's a careful, methodical process that happens largely beneath the narcissist's awareness until it's already complete. 2010 reports of this super empath begins documenting everything, not out of spite, but out of clear-eyed recognition that they're dealing with someone who will distort reality. Texts, emails, financial records, all of it gets quietly preserved. Not for revenge, but for protection, for the inevitable moment when the narcissist tries to rewrite history. Simultaneously, they begin the careful work of disentanglement. If there are shared finances, the super empath starts securing their resources, separating accounts, ensuring they can't be financially sabotaged. If there are mutual friends or professional connections, the super empath isn't gossiping or campaigning. They're simply being honest when asked direct questions, letting their consistency and credibility speak for itself. If there are shared responsibilities, the super empath systematically transfers or terminates their obligations, ensuring clean breaks with no loose threads the narcissist can pull on later. What makes this particularly effective is that it's not driven by emotion, even though emotion is certainly present. The super empath feels the hurt, the anger, the grief, but they don't act from those feelings alone. They act from clarity about what's necessary for their safety and well-being. This gives their actions a quality of inevitability, of finality, that the narcissist struggles to counter. There's nothing to argue against, because the super empath isn't engaging in argument. There's nothing to manipulate because the decisions have already been made at a level deeper than the conversation. The narcissist typically tries their usual tactics during this period. They might attempt to love bomb, promising change and showering attention. But the super empath has seen this cycle too many times. They know it's temporary performance, not genuine transformation. They might try to provoke anger or jealousy, hoping to re-engage through conflict. But the super empath refuses to be provoked, responding with either factual brevity or complete silence. They might try to play victim, attempting to trigger the super empath's compassion. But the super empath has learned to distinguish. between genuine vulnerability and strategic performance. What the narcissist finds, to their increasing frustration, is that none of their tools work anymore. Every manipulation attempt encounters a wall of calm, methodical boundary enforcement. Every effort to create emotional chaos meets with crystalline clarity and refusal to engage. Every attempt to maintain hooks into the super empath's life gets systematically severed. It's not dramatic, it's surgical task. This is perhaps what makes the super empath's departure so threatening. It reveals to the narcissist that they never actually had the power they thought they had. Dorian now is often a survival role. The relationship continued only as long as the super empath chose to stay, and now that choice has been irrevocably withdrawn. No amount of charm, manipulation, or strategy can reverse a decision made with this level of clarity and executed with this level of competence. You can't manipulate someone back into a cage once they've realized they were always holding the key. This strategic departure becomes even more consequential when we consider the super empath's position within their broader social ecosystem. And this is where the narcissist's betrayal creates perhaps its most lasting damage. The super empath's voice carries weight that the narcissist's increasingly desperate narratives simply cannot match. You see, the super empath has typically spent years, perhaps decades, building genuine relationships that exist completely independent of the narcissist. They've invested in people authentically, shown up consistently, demonstrated integrity across multiple contexts. They have friends who know them deeply, colleagues who respect their judgment, family members who trust their character. This network isn't built on charm or performance. It's built on substance, on repeated demonstrations of reliability, empathy, and honesty. The narcissist, by Kant, typically has what we might call a wide but shallow social network. They know many people, but few know them. Their relationships are often transactional, based on what they can extract or how they appear, rather than on genuine mutual regard. They may have admirers, enablers, people they've successfully charmed, but they rarely have people who truly know them and still choose to stand by them. Their relationships don't deepen over time. They cycle through people as those people gradually recognize the pattern and distance themselves. So when the super empath finally breaks their characteristic silence and speaks about what happened, something significant occurs. People believe them, not because they're dramatic or persuasive in their pain, but precisely because they're not. The super empath typically doesn't embellish, doesn't exaggerate, doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. They simply state what happened with the same straightforward honesty that's characterized all their other communications. And because this honesty is consistent with who people know them to be, it carries immediate credibility. There's another factor at play here that the narcissist fundamentally miscalculates. The super empath was the reasonable one throughout the relationship. They were the one giving second chances, third chances, countless chances. They were the one making excuses, trying to understand, giving the benefit of the doubt. People around them often watched this with some concern, sometimes wanting to say something but holding back out of respect for the super empath's choices. So when this person, who has been so patient, so understanding, so reluctant to speak ill of anyone, finally says, "This person harmed me, and this is how," it lands with particular force. It's not seen as vindictiveness or scorned lover's revenge. It's seen as a last resort from someone who ride everything else first. The very restraint they demonstrated throughout the relationship now becomes credibility in its aftermath. Meanwhile, the narcissist is often simultaneously trying to control the narrative, painting themselves as the victim, telling elaborate stories about the super empath's supposed instability or cruelty. But these stories don't match what people observed. They don't align with the super empath's documented character, and crucially, the narcissist's increasing desperation to be believed, their need to convince people, their emotional volatility in telling their version. All of this actually undermines their credibility while reinforcing the super empaths. The contrast becomes increasingly stark. One person calmly stating facts that align with their known character. Another person frantically spinning narratives that require everyone to believe this reliable. That a person suddenly became someone completely different. Which story sounds more plausible? The narcissist can't compete with the truth when it's spoken by someone whose entire life has been a demonstration of truthfulness, especially when their own life has been a performance. But perhaps the most profound consequence of betraying a super empath, and the one the narcissist can least anticipate, is what happens to the super empath themselves in the aftermath. Because unlike many who emerge from narcissistic relationships diminished or broken, the super empath undergoes something closer to a completion of their psychological development. The betrayal doesn't destroy them, it completes their education. Every ounce of pain gets metabolized into understanding. Every moment of confusion gets transformed into clarity. Every instance of manipulation they endured becomes a lesson they've now mastered. The super empath doesn't just heal from the experience. They integrate it. They extract wisdom from it. They allow it to refine rather than define them. What emerges is someone fundamentally changed, but not in the way the narcissist damaged them. Changed in the sense of becoming more fully themselves, more aligned with their own truth, more unshakable in their boundaries. This transformation operates at multiple levels simultaneously. At the cognitive level, the super empath now possesses an encyclopedic understanding of manipulation tactics, gaslighting techniques, narcissistic patterns. They can spot red flags at 100 paces. Material of nightmare. They see the previous quad says, they identify triangulation, projection, word salad, future faking, all of it with immediate clarity. This isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition honed to a razor's edge. At the emotional level, something equally significant occurs. The super empath develops what we might call calibrated compassion. They maintain their empathic capacity, their ability to feel deeply and connect authentically. But they no longer extend this indiscriminately. They've learned the crucial distinction between empathy and enabling, between understanding someone's pain and accepting abuse because of it, between being kind and being available for exploitation. Their compassion remains intact, but it's now protected by boundaries that are essentially impenetrable to manipulation. At the behavioral level, their tolerance for anything resembling the patterns they endured drops to zero, not through reactivity or hypervigilance, but through clear-eyed recognition. The moment someone starts employing narcissistic tactics, even subtle ones, even early in a relationship, the super empath recognizes it immediately and responds with swift, definitive boundaries. Time there were. There's no second guessing. No, maybe I'm being too sensitive. No, giving endless chances to people who've shown them exactly who they are. What makes this particularly threatening to the narcissist who betrayed them is that the super empath often doesn't keep this wisdom to themselves. They begin speaking about their experience, not obsessively, not as their entire identity, but as part of a larger mission to help others recognize what they couldn't see when they were in it. They write about it. They share resources. They validate others who are just beginning to question their own relationships. They become what I described earlier as pattern interrupters, but now with even greater authority because they're speaking from lived experience combined with deep psychological understanding. The super empath becomes living proof that narcissistic abuse can be survived, understood, and transcended. They demonstrate that you can maintain your empathic nature without remaining vulnerable to exploitation. They show others that the confusion and self-doubt you feel in these relationships isn't a character flaw. It's the intended result of systematic psychological manipulation. And they offer something invaluable: hope, alongside practical wisdom about how to recognize, resist, and recover from these dynamics. The narcissist's betrayal didn't break the super empath. It forged them into someone who can never be manipulated again and who now helps others become similarly unmanipulable.